We are Mike and Jeannie, and we restore old houses. In 2021, we moved to South Carolina and bought a 120-year-old Victorian house. Follow along as we put the polish back on this Victorian masterpiece.
Welcome back to 1834 Restoration House.
It's a cold, dreary winter day. The rain is falling, but it's nice and warm in here. And guess what? We have something to show you.
The spare bedroom is ready. Come and take a look. Welcome to the spare bedroom. This used to be the tool room. Now it's a spare bedroom. We've brought in some of our antique furniture and displayed it out here. It looks pretty good. Take a look. Over here, we start with the more modern part of the room. We have a closet space. These are some of the books that we think our family members would like. Just gentle reading, nothing intense. And our bed, I put some fairy lights up here all the way around so that it has a gentle atmosphere in the evening and they don't have to go all the way out of bed to the light switch to turn it on and off. We can just have a little gentle light. And then over here, this is a little sitting area and an antique oil lamp. Somebody turned it into a electric lamp. We've got the cord all wrapped up underneath. There's no light bulb in it. And I'm hoping one day Mike can turn this into an oil lamp again. I would really like that. This is a little jewelry box. They can put their rings in it or earrings, whatever they would like. And then over here, we have the mantelpiece. I put some oil lamps that are modern made, but they kind of look more like antique, so I like them up here. And then our antique clock. And that completes our spare bedroom. Thank you for watching this part, guys. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the help with the curtains. I didn't make them floor length because it's really hard to keep cleaning all around the edges with the floor length drapes.
All right, guys, we're back in the wood shop here, and one of our longtime viewers named Maggie Sue sent us a question. She wanted to know, what is the difference between a jointer and a planer, and why are they used the way they are? Both machines are very important, and each one serves a distinct function. This here is the planer, and this machine here is the jointer. This is a piece of rough sawn lumber, and they're cut by high-speed machines, and you can pretty much guarantee that they're not square. So look at this. You see that is cut at an angle. We have no idea whether these edges and angles are true to each other or not. In fact, they probably aren't, and that's what these machines are for. Let's take a look at what our board might look like. It may have this, it may have that, and it may have something like that going on. I'm just exaggerating a little bit. But what we do is we buy our lumber a little bit oversized, knowing that we're going to waste some of it. And we expect that our finished board may be more like this. And so we know that we're going to have to waste some of that material to get our boards absolutely flat and true. The planer has a flat deck, and it has some rollers on the bottom, and then up above are these knives that will remove the material off of the board, and there's also a feed screw which pushes it through automatically. Now, whatever you put through here is going to get planed off on the top until it's flat and smooth. The jointer, on the other hand, has two decks, a lower deck, an upper deck, and I should say that there's actually a third deck, which is the side deck. These two decks are completely 90 degrees to each other. So one of the questions that people have when they first see this setup is they say, well, why don't you just put the board through the planer once, flip it over and put it back through the other side? Won't that make a nice flat board? Yes and no. And here's why. I've drawn a representation of the planer here. Now let's say you've got a board that's nice and long, and let's say it's got a curve on it like that. And you try to put this through the planer. What's going to happen is it'll make a nice flat top on this board, but as that board goes through the planer, it's still going to have a curve on it. And so when it comes out the back end, you still have a curved board, which is not going to work if you're trying to do fine furniture. Here's another example. Let's say you have a board and we're looking down the end of that board and you can see that it's cupped. And the way we fix that is we send it down the jointer. So what the jointer does is it has two tables, a lower table and an upper table. I've exaggerated the difference between the two, but in reality, we generally will set these for a 1/16 of an inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch maximum between this elevation and that elevation. So what happens is you put that board on there like this, and you've pushed it through. So what these cutters have done is they've cut a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch off that board. This end here remains flat on the deck. This end also remains flat on the deck. And so as it goes through, you've taken off that little bit, and so this ends up looking more like this. You may still have a little bit of a cup right there, but not nearly as much. And then you can take that board off and run it back through again, and then you end up with something that is pretty much totally flat. Now that we have a board that's completely flat on the bottom, we could run that through the planer, and that planer would then plane off the top, and it would be absolutely square. And you may have to run it through a few different times, making adjustments. But eventually, you end up taking enough material that the entire board on both surfaces is completely flat and level all the way down the board. So you can see that both machines are important, but they rely on each other, and everything has to be done in a certain order to get the results you need. If you do it out of order, you're going to end up with some really strange boards. Maggie Sue, thank you for the question, and I hope that answered it. In last week's episode, we created all these finger joints, or box joints, so that we could build Jeannie a blanket chest for one of the bedrooms. And so before we put that together, we need to figure out what we're doing for the bottom, because that has to be part of it. So let me show you something real quick. This is the front panel. This is the end panel. And let's just pretend that this is put together for a minute. All right, now we need to make a bottom for this thing. There are two ways to do this. We could either take wood, put it on like that, and glue it in, or we could put it in like that and glue it in. Or the third option is we could create a rabbet joint, and that involves putting a groove here and here, and then taking our bottom board and routing it down so that there's a thin tongue. And then that tongue will fit in that groove like that. And then when we put the whole thing together, we end up with a really nice jointed box.
Oh yeah, I like that one.
We'll be putting a cedar bottom in the bottom of this box. Now, you see the bottom of these notches right here? That represents the inside of the box on all sides like that. So these finger joints will go together, and then where the bottom of the notch is will be the inside corner here and here. I'm going to measure between this corner and this corner, and I have about 38 3/4. Here I have about 14 1/8. But if we want a tongue that can go into its neighboring board, we need to add 1/4 of an inch on every single side. And that means that the entire board needs to grow by a 1/2 inch in this dimension and a 1/2 inch in this dimension. We just cut 2 of these cedar boards here, and we're going to machine these down now and make a bottom out of it. This is aromatic cedar. Oh, yeah. I wish we had smell-o-vision. Okay, so we talked about the jointer. The jointer's job is to flatten one face of the board. Once that's done, we take that board and we lay the flat face against the fence and then run the edge through. And when we're done, we'll have one flat face and one edge. Can you believe this? Look at that color. I've seen this go from red to purple. Now with sunlight exposure, it turns more brown like that. You would never expect to find something so beautiful underneath that brownness, but wow, that's incredible. Now this is going to spend its whole life in the darkness, and so over time, it really shouldn't turn like that. It'll stay more like this. What this does is it gives me one flat edge on the bottom, one flat edge on the side. I can take this now and put it through the planer, and I know that I'm going to get a perfect flat board on this edge. Well, how do I flatten the edge? Well, I put this up against the table saw, and I run the blade down here, and I'll get another perfect edge this way. One thing that I noticed when I put these boards through the jointer is that they're exceptionally flat, and they've been sitting around for, I don't know, what, 6 months now? They're exceptionally flat, and they haven't warped. So the dimensional stability of these boards is really, really good. Well, we've had an interesting turn of events here. Today, it's actually warmer outside the house than it is inside the house in the middle of January. So we've opened up all the doors and windows, and we're letting all the summer breeze waft into our house. On the jointer, we managed to get one face flat and one edge flat and true, 90 degrees. So then we ran the other side through the planer, and now both sides are flat and true. So what I'm doing now is taking that perfect edge and I'm putting it right up against the table saw, and I'm going to let the table saw take off just a whisker, and that will take off anything that's not true and straight on this edge of the board. The next thing I need to do is cut a groove, and that groove will be like this and then straight down. And I'm going to do that on both boards. That way I can sandwich them together in what we call a rabbet joint. And we talked about this last week, but let me just show you some more details about how I achieve that. So my table saw fence allows me to slide this back and forth like that. So when I bring that fence this way, that makes the blade go deeper into the board in this direction. And the way I set the height of the notch is by raising and lowering the blade. I decided that I want the rabbet to be 1/4 inch deep, this direction. And I can't use the calibrated scale on the table saw because it's been calibrated to a single wide blade. Well, this won't work because that's a dado blade. So I'm going to have to do it the hard way with a measure. I've measured 1/4 inch and made a pencil mark. And it's not super critical because I'm going to lock this fence down, and once that's locked, it'll be the same no matter how many boards I run through here. Can you go around the backside and hold that so it doesn't fall over? Because I need it to be like clear back here behind all that stuff, behind all the teeth.
Okay.
Okay. Looks pretty good right there. Well, you guys got to see us calibrate the thing. So we moved the fence until the board and its pencil mark lines up perfectly with the saw blade. And then I lock it down. I'm going to release it and relock it just to make sure it's straight, because this is a self-aligning fence. and everything looks really good. Okay, that's great. Now the next thing I'm going to do is start lowering that blade because I want to make a cut that goes part way into the board and actually will go more than 50% of the thickness by just a little bit. Let's find out how thick this is. So it is exactly 0.91 inches. So half of 0.91 inches is 0.455. So what I'm going to do is bring this down to 0.455. Now remember, we need to cut more than 50% because we have to have some place for the glue to go. So I'm going to make that bigger, let's say 0.5. So we'll make a ½ inch cut. I'm setting my calipers to 0.5, and then I'll make a mark on the board where that is. Now I can put my board down here and move the sawtooth until it's at its highest point, which is right in the middle. And then I want to raise the saw blade until it touches that line. Here you can see the rabbet joint profiles, and they push together really nicely. But wait a minute, there's a gap there. And that's on purpose. And that's why we cut that hole just a little bit too tall. The reason we do this is because if we don't do it, the glue has no place to go, and it'll force the boards apart, and it'll end up looking like this. I'm just kind of exaggerating. But that gives us a much better result. And you'll never see it from the outside. And because we're gluing it up on a flat surface, it'll be perfectly flat. It's time to do a glue up. Last week when we did this, the glue penetrated through some paper that we had laid down here and it rusted our deck. But this week, we've laid down saran wrap so that won't happen. I'm going to go ahead and take my board here and lay a line of glue on it. I'm going to go ahead and put that together. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put some clamps on now. Just to make sure that they're absolutely level, I'm going to go ahead and just tap them with this mallet. Okay. Now we can go ahead and put the clamps on a little tighter. These things are capable of some incredible force, so they don't have to be really cranked down hard. Just hand tight is sufficient usually. It's been an hour and the glue needs about 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and take these clamps off now. The next thing I'm going to do is cut the board down to the proper dimensions. This panel is now cut to the right size, this way and this way. And it's all glued up and everything's perfect. So I've preset the saw blade and the fence, and I'm going to cut a rabbet joint down both sides here. It'll be 1/4 of an inch deep, and it'll be 3/8 of an inch high. I'm going to say that woodworking is probably 10% of cutting and 90% of head scratching. We do the cuts, and then we have to stop and think about how are we going to make the next cut and do it accurately and safely. And then you run into problems like this. So we've made our dado cut along the edges. That was no problem because we could just run it right along there. But we really don't have that option on the edges because this table saw is not wide enough, and I can't push that fence out far enough in order to get an accurate feed over here. So this is what we came up with. 3 different possibilities how we can possibly do this. One is I could push it up against here, attempt to hold it tight, and hope that it doesn't slide sideways as I'm pulling it through the blade. Well, that's not very accurate and could potentially be dangerous, so that's off the table. Well, the other possibility is that I could put this fence right up against the blade and then push it through and have a 1/2 inch deep cut, but then that 1/2 inch deep cut would show on the underside, and yes, nobody's probably going to look under there, but still, if we can make it better, let's make it better. The third option I came up with is called a sacrificial fence. We don't want to cut our fence. These things are expensive and they're very nice and very accurate. If I take a piece of wood and I clamp this piece of wood on here, now I have a fence that I can harm, right? So now I can take this fence and bring it up here, and I can run this blade up into the fence, and it cuts a hole, a circular hole, and that allows us to have just the right amount of depth to put this board up against it. And the only damage that happens is to this piece of wood. That's okay. That's what it's there for. I'm clamping this on, but I'm making sure that my clamp is up high enough that I can still run the board underneath it, because otherwise I'm going to hit that clamp and, well, that doesn't work too well. So I'll do this, and I'll put another one over here just like it. Make it nice and tight so it doesn't move. All right, now we have a sacrificial fence. The first thing I'm going to do is lower the blade under the table. Okay, I'm going to pull the fence over so that it completely covers the blade. I'll lock it down, and now I'm going to make that cut and come up into the fence. Now I need to make my adjustments. So I want this to be 1/4 inch. So my blade is 1/4 inch away from this board. So when I run my workpiece through there, it's going to cut a slot that's about 1/8 inch, sorry, 1/4 inch this way. But I also need to set the height. So I need 3/8 inch. So I'm just going to look at my tooth here and raise it up. And just a hair more. The hard work is done. Let's make the cut. Well, that was probably one of the scariest cuts I've ever made. Not because it was dangerous, but because after all that work, you don't want to mess it up and have to start over again. But we measured it, and everything is just about right. Everything is just a hair undersized, because the way this thing fits, we need to have just a little bit of slop so that it doesn't, crush in and prevent our box joints from closing up properly. And I think we're right where we have to be. So,
I think it's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. And it smells wonderful.
If we only had smell-o-vision here, the aroma is just intoxicating, the old cedar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It seems like it is shifting color even as the day goes on. It was more intense purple when we first opened it up, and now it seems to be reacting with the air probably.
Yeah.
And changing color. But that's all right. This is a wood that you want to keep around for decades and decades, and it'll be in the dark anyway. Well, you guys, we really appreciate you stopping by and watching this, but we are out of time and we have to stop recording for the day. So we will see you next week.
Yes, thank you for watching 1834 Restoration House.